Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's third Thursday webinar from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. I'm Dr. Karen Jaffe, a member of the Fox Foundation Patient Council and the moderator for today's webinar, which will focus on clinical trial participation and what role you might play in it. Before we get started, please note that there are a few tips listed on your screen to help should you have any technical difficulties over the course of our discussion today. As always, you will be able to submit your questions into our conversation throughout the webinar. You can just type your questions in that little Q&A box on the screen, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can before the end of the hour. Let me remind you that you can also download the slides from this webinar. Just click on the box titled Resource List on your screen. A new browser window will open, and you can save them or print them from there. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're going to focus on today in our discussion about clinical trial participation and the role that you can play in advancing Parkinson's disease research. We will begin our discussion with a look at why clinical trials need volunteers both with and without Parkinson's disease. We will talk about the different types of trials available, and we will get an update on the current use of technology, both as a research tool as well as in trial recruitment. In the second half of our webinar, we will narrow our focus with a conversation about genetic research, its importance, and its unique challenges. We will then wrap up our discussion as we weigh the benefits and risks of signing up to be a clinical trial volunteer. Okay, let's meet our panelists for today's discussion. Glenn Leppo was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at age 48. He enrolled in his first clinical trial shortly after his diagnosis and then has participated in over 20 trials since. Glenn, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Our next panelist hails from Alabama, Dr. Marissa Dean. Dr. Dean is a Movement Disorders Fellow at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and has an interest in recruitment diversity. Dr. Dean, welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Rounding out our panel is Dr. Katie Kopel. Katie is the Director of the Michael J. Fox Foundation Research Partnerships Team. Hello, Katie.
Thanks, Karen. We're really excited about today's topic.
Okay, let's start our discussion with a quote from Michael J. Fox, who said, "The cures we want aren't going to fall from the sky. We have to get ladders and climb up and get them." Which is to say that those of us with Parkinson's have a pivotal role to play in helping researchers learn about the disease and in helping them with the development of new treatments. It is certainly fair to say that every treatment that exists today is the direct result of volunteers who raised their hands to participate in clinical research. So Katie Kopel, as a research scientist, talk about the value that any one person might have when they make that commitment to enroll as a study volunteer.
Many studies are looking for hundreds of individuals to get an experimental therapy or a new diagnostic test across the finish line, and no amount of dollars can really get a new therapeutic to pharmacy shelves, get a new diagnostic test into doctors' offices. It requires people that are willing to participate in research. And so when you say, okay, well, that study has 100 people, what about me? You are one of those people that can take an action and help change the landscape of the way that we understand Parkinson's and the way we treat Parkinson's. And so thinking about the contribution of an individual to research is really invaluable, because that contribution cannot be changed by money. It really takes people participating in studies, contributing their time, their perspectives, their data and experiences with Parkinson's disease to really change the way that we think about treating Parkinson's.
That's interesting. Now, Glenn, I know that you have been in a whole host of studies. Tell us a bit about making that decision to enroll and what keeps you continuing to answer this call to action.
Well, Karen, personally, I want better treatments that make my life better, slow the progression of the disease, and ultimately cure Parkinson's. I know, as Katie just said, we can't get there without researchers. You know, they need people who can participate who have Parkinson's disease and controls as well. We know better than anybody else how this disease impacts us, and more than anything else, I think we really need people who are recently diagnosed, as I did with the PPMI study and some other studies. I got in early because there's only 60,000 people have been diagnosed within the last year, and there's about 1 million of us out there with PD. So I think not only participating, but participating early is important.
Katie Coble, why is the PPMI study, which stands for the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative study, why is it important that people enroll early on in their disease in that study?
An interesting example of a study that was focused on defining a test for Parkinson's. So if you have Parkinson's or someone you know has Parkinson's, you'll be very familiar with this idea. There is no test for Parkinson's disease. Many people have an experience of seeing different doctors and finding it challenging to get a diagnosis. And so the PPMI study was trying to identify something that could be a test for early diagnosis. And so in the case of that particular study, it was important to find individuals that were early in their disease that could benefit from such a test that might have saved doctor's visits or years of frustration in terms of getting an accurate diagnosis or understanding how someone's disease changes over time. There are other types of clinical studies that are also interested in studying individuals at early stages of their disease, but at the same time, there are many studies, including studies that are testing potential therapies for improving symptoms of Parkinson's, like cognition, changes in balance, off periods. And those studies are looking for people at more later in their patient journey. And so what I think is interesting to highlight is there are studies that are looking for people earlier in their disease, and what's important to remember is as you're struggling with the new information about having a Parkinson's diagnosis, that even in that early stage when you might feel overwhelmed by the news, that you have an opportunity to take action. And this idea that it's not just people early in their disease, but if you feel empowered, that you can take control of your disease by participating in research, or you can help take control of your loved one's disease by participating in research, that can continue throughout someone's journey with Parkinson's.
Well, and as it so happens, my husband, Marc, he was also a PPMI volunteer, but not as a person with Parkinson's, but actually as a control subject. And I think that many people may be unaware that a person without Parkinson's also plays a very important role in getting us closer to the answers we need. Marissa, why do clinical research trials need healthy controls in a study that is trying to understand the biology of a disease such as Parkinson's disease?
Right, so that's a great question. Parkinson's disease, as we know, tends to affect people later in life. And so healthy controls are needed to give us kind of a baseline of what it looks like to have healthy aging. So if we may find something in a clinical trial or a research study that is present in Parkinson's disease patients, we want to make sure that that's just exclusive to Parkinson's disease patients. It may not be present in the general healthy population. And as we mentioned before, we definitely need all sorts of age ranges of people with Parkinson's disease, beginning stages of Parkinson's disease, the middle stages, the end stages. It's very important that we can evaluate each group as a general population as well.
Yeah, as Marc and I began our journey being clinical trial volunteers, we were actually surprised to learn that 80% of clinical trials are delayed due to slow enrollment, and up to 30% of clinical trials lack the critical enrollment to even get started. So, Dr. Koppel, can there ever be too many people willing to step up to the plate?
No. There's always, I would say, in the landscape that we see, there are more studies that are ongoing that require volunteers than there are people that meet the criteria for enrolling in those studies. And so I hope at some point in time we get to a place where we don't need research volunteers for Parkinson's because we've gotten to a cure. But right now there's always opportunity for people to be involved. And the levels of involvement can range from what you might think of in a traditional research study of going to a doctor's office and being put through an examination by a doctor or completing different types of tests in a clinical setting, to simply logging onto your computer and taking a survey. And people should be aware that any type of contribution to Parkinson's research is helping us get closer to an answer. And so there are a variety of ways to contribute, and I would charge people listening to today's webinar to find a way that makes sense for them and a way that they are excited about to contribute to research, because it's not one size fits all in terms of your lifestyle, in terms of your personal choices, in terms of the time you have to commit. So there are many studies out there that are looking for volunteers, and anything you can do to help contribute to that research advancement really has a big impact on Parkinson's disease.
Katie, one of the first questions that come across the queue here already is somebody's asking if there's any data on whether more or less people are joining studies now versus 10 years ago.
Right now, there are actually more studies ongoing. So as a consequence, there are more volunteers needed and more people that are participating actively in studies. We have seen anecdotally through an examination of a tool the foundation has invested in called Fox Trial Finder, that people that have in the last 10 years, there's been an increase in the awareness of research and the opportunities to get connected with research. And so I don't know that I have the hard statistics to say how many more people are participating in research today, but I think compared to 10 years ago, there's certainly greater awareness about research participation, and in fact, I would put money on this idea that more people are participating in research.
I would say, I mean, anecdotally, I've had Parkinson's now for 10 years, and when I first got diagnosed, there was no Fox Trial Finder and all these other resources that are available now. So I think that there is much more awareness, and therefore many more people are probably joining research trials than they did before. Okay, so, while each person makes the decision to become a clinical trial volunteer in their own way and for their own reasons, this slide reminds us that once we do, there are plenty of options. Marissa, can you talk a bit about the difference between an observational study and an interventional trial and why we need study volunteers for both?
Sure. So an observational study is a study that, basically it's observational. So we are generally conducting the research trials through surveys. We may collect a blood sample, may want spinal fluid, but basically this study is looking at biomarkers, looking at the progression of the disease, looking at symptoms of the disease at different stages. Could be early, middle, late stage, and more of when.
So the PPMI is an observation.
Yes. So PPMI is a good example of an observational study, where you would come in, you have exams, you may see a physician, answer a bunch of questions on surveys, etc. In a clinical trial, that's more of your interventional trial, which I think a lot of people think of when they think of research. They think, well, I'm going to go and I'm either going to get a study drug or I'm going to get a placebo drug, which is not the active drug. And in those trials, that's your classic where you will come in, you will be examined. You also may have surveys, but there will be some sort of intervention. That doesn't always have to be a medication or a drug. It could be therapy. It could be other sorts of physical therapy type interventions. And so it doesn't always have to be a medication either.
So exercise programs or surgical procedures, things like that can also be interventional trials.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So Glenn, you've been in almost every type of trial that there is, I think. Why don't you share with the audience a few of the studies that you have completed, perhaps highlighting some of the specific aspects that you were drawn to?
Well, my favorite kind of trial is an exercise trial. Honestly, the more I can do without taking more drugs, because like many people with Parkinson's, I'm on multiple drugs and many times a day. So if I can do things that will help guide a better treatment, a better outcome, using something like exercise or diet or those kinds of things. So I've done several biking trials that are interesting to participate in. And then the technology ones, the things that are coming along anymore, I've worn watches that keep track of my tremors. I've put a software on my computer that measures my typing cadence and tries to tie that to Parkinson's. So those kinds of trials where I don't have to do anything different other than maybe wear a watch and can provide a huge amount of data to the researchers. It's fascinating what it seems like they should be able to do with that data.
And are you still in the PPMI study?
Yeah, I signed up originally for the trial was 5 years, and then they've asked us to extend. I don't remember, it's to 7 or 8 years. So yeah, I'm still a participant in PPMI.
Yeah, just this week I happened to catch Michael J. Fox being interviewed on Good Morning America, and in response to a question about finding a cure and the importance of clinical trial participation, Michael, who is, by the way, sporting a very attractive beard, said, "We are the answers we are looking for." So Katie Copel, let's talk about the Fox Insight study and how that relates to Michael's comment referencing we, and how each one of us has the answer that we're looking for.
What Michael is referring to is this person-centered idea that while researchers might have some extra degrees at the end of their name, the people that are really expert in Parkinson's disease are the people that live with it, and the people that live with it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, whether those are people with Parkinson's or their family members and loved ones that are also affected by the disease. Fox Insight is one of these studies, an observational study, so that's not testing any therapy or intervention, that is looking to collect information directly from individuals without any filter of a doctor, without any filter of a researcher. And I think it's so interesting to consider something like Fox Insight in terms of the type of data that can be collected through a study that is online. And this is a study that can be done for anyone over 18 years of age that speaks English and has an internet connection. And so the scale of data, and Glenn was talking about this, collecting a lot of data points from one person using something like a smartwatch. Fox Insight might not collect 1 million data points per person, but it can collect that information from tens of thousands of individuals. And it's interesting. I'm excited about Fox Insight because I think it will give us better understanding of the real lived experience of Parkinson's. The other piece that I'm excited about, and I think this helps demystify what research is sometimes it's collecting a survey. There are opportunities to share information, but you're invited to come back over time, but we understand that people have lives, and just because you miss one study visit doesn't mean that you can't continue to participate in that study. You can come back. And so we realize that there's an opportunity, and the field is moving this way, to make research, be that in a traditional setting in a doctor's office or online, more person-centered, and that there really is an ability to amplify the patient's voice in research, the type of research that's conducted and how it's conducted.
One of our listeners is asking whether you can ever be too old to participate in a study.
So there are what are called eligibility criteria for research studies. And each research question that's being asked may have certain things that make you eligible. That could be living in a particular country. It could be different types of medication that you are on that might make it challenging to safely participate in the study. Sometimes age is considered an eligibility criteria on both ends of the spectrum. Too young or too old for that particular research question. But that doesn't mean that there's any age at which you stop participating in research at large. And so an example of a study where there is only a lower age limitation is in a study like Fox Insight. So individuals have to be at least 18 years of age to participate, but it's actually more important to have people at older ages, both with Parkinson's and without, to again answer a question that Marissa had pointed out about what is Parkinson's aging look like compared to people that are aging without Parkinson's.
So Fox Insight is an opportunity for controls to also sign up and participate.
That's right. So I don't have Parkinson's and I participate in Fox Insight. There's opportunity for people that are interested in starting with a simple way to participate in research, contributing to Fox Insight if you don't have Parkinson's. I think another interesting part of the study is looking at the impact that Parkinson's has on care partners and family members of someone with Parkinson's. So data from individuals that have a family association with Parkinson's might not just be as a comparator group to say, okay, you do have Parkinson's, you don't have Parkinson's, but also understand the burden of Parkinson's on people that support the actual patient. So there's different ways to think about the ways that people without Parkinson's can contribute to research, not just as a comparator, but also as groups that have unique perspectives on the disease and the lived experience.
Well, so Julie asks us, she says that a lot of clinical trials that she's looked at have excluded her because of DBS. And you talked about exclusion criteria, and that's certainly one that often falls into there. People with DBS certainly can enroll in Fox Insight, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So Katie, we're going to move on to talk about the genetics of Parkinson's disease, and I think that this is a good opportunity for us to maybe talk about Fox Insight, how it serves as a portal for patients to engage in genetic research before we get into this topic.
Great. So one of the things that I'm sure we'll get to talk about is, what are the genetics behind Parkinson's, which I'm excited to say we're learning more every day. When I was in graduate school studying neuroscience, people didn't think there was a genetic connection to Parkinson's, and now 10, 15 years later, we know that there are strong genetic components to Parkinson's disease. And I say that as a teaser because I know we'll talk about those genetic connections in a moment and some of the treatments that are being developed that could potentially slow or stop Parkinson's related to those genes. But I say it because we only get to have those insights and those understandings of a genetic link to something like Parkinson's because people were willing to participate in research in the first place, and people were willing to contribute their DNA to be studied to understand if there is any genetic link to Parkinson's. Within Fox Insight, and this is a study that the foundation sponsors, in a partnership with 23andMe, individuals with Parkinson's have an ability to contribute genetic research. In this study, you would also have the opportunity to find out, if you would like, and it's a personal decision, you would have the opportunity to find out whether or not you have a mutation in two particular genes that have been associated with Parkinson's. And the two genes are LRRK2, LRRK2, and GBA. So there's an opportunity to just contribute to research. There's an opportunity to contribute to research and find out your genetic status for two risk genes associated with Parkinson's disease. And for people that choose to find out, there's also an opportunity to receive genetic counseling, which is an important part of being informed about what to do with the information, whether or not you carry a mutation in those genes. So we wanted to highlight today that there's a lot of easy ways to get involved, and there's an opportunity to be in control of the type of research you participate in and also how you receive back information. And in something like Fox Insight, the choice is in your hands. In talking with other types of studies, there's always opportunity to learn more about what you will get out of the study when you decide to participate. And so this is also an opportunity to think about how you are informed about the decision to participate and how you want to participate.
Well, Dr. Coble, on that same topic, what have we learned about what have we already learned and what's on the horizon in regards to the genetics of Parkinson's disease?
So there are 3 well-known in the research community genes that have a link to Parkinson's. And again, as I mentioned, that's a new insight that's happened over the last 20 years, and LRRK2 and GBA, which I mentioned previously, are more recent than that. Those genes that seem to have mutations that increase somebody's risk for Parkinson's are a way to sort of unlock a black box of what Parkinson's is. And when we, as scientists, try to understand why does someone get Parkinson's, why does someone not get Parkinson's, and really the greatest risk factor is age, it's hard to figure out what to hold on to work our way back and understand what causes Parkinson's. Is it genetics? Is it environment? Is it something that we still don't understand? And the discovery of particular genetic mutations associated with Parkinson's has really revolutionized the way that we can better understand the disease biology. So there's exciting advances in understanding why Parkinson's develops, who may be at risk for developing it, who might be at lower risk for developing it. And so there's an exciting piece of research around understanding Parkinson's. There's an also equally exciting piece about how do you treat Parkinson's, and many other disease areas have had success in identifying a genetic mutation associated with the disease and then developing therapies that try to correct for that genetic mutation. And we're seeing a number of studies start to move into clinical testing that are perhaps something that could be close to a cure, stopping or slowing disease progression, that are based around individuals that carry mutations and trying to correct for the natural activity that those genes would have. So there's a lot of exciting genetic research, both from an understanding Parkinson's perspective as well as a treating Parkinson's perspective.
Marissa, this is a complicated issue, though. I'm sure that there's a lot of your clients who have questions regarding the privacy of their genetic data, and also does it have an impact on things like their health insurance and things like that. What kind of conversations do you have with your clients that you see in the office regarding these issues that can be kind of ones that people struggle with?
Right, so that's a great question, and I think one that everyone who's getting genetic testing should have. We're very lucky to also have genetic counselors available that can discuss these topics in more detail. But when I'm discussing genetic testing with patients, there is, in regards to medical insurance, there is protection through GINA, which is an organization or a law that went into effect that provides protection against medical insurance companies using genetic information against you or toward your medical insurance. However, there may be other types of insurance that includes like life insurance or disability insurance, which are not included under that Privacy Act. So that is something that I discuss with my patients so that they're aware of that. But this is something that we do have genetic counselors speak in more detail regarding if there's any further questions. And this may be more of a case-by-case basis whether this is important or not important in regards to where you are in your life and what you're thinking about in the future.
Right. Glenn, can you talk a little bit about, this is a very personal decision when people decide to get genetic testing. Talk about the process that you went through to come to a decision regarding your own testing.
Well, I have some of the concerns that people, talked about, particularly the health insurance, those kinds of things. But the reality is I wanted to know. My wife and I have 2 sons, and they're I was diagnosed before they were married, but one's married, one's engaged, and before they started having the families of their own, I wanted to know and be able to let them know if I was a carrier, because I don't have any family history anywhere of having Parkinson's, but it doesn't mean that I'm not a carrier myself, and so I wanted to be able to let them know the risks. And fortunately for me, I didn't have at least the most common and most prevalent mutations that lead towards a higher prevalence towards Parkinson's, but it is a big personal decision whether you're going to do that or not. So it was really trying to make sure that my boys knew as much as they possibly could when they were moving forward. And I didn't get genetic counseling the first time around because I did it 5-6 years ago now. But when I took part in the Fox Insight / 23andMe, I said, yeah, you can use my data. They already had my data from before. That I did participate in the genetic counseling. So I think that's a great idea, and it's a great addition to the process to have that genetic counseling available for everybody who's participating, and particularly if you choose to know the answer.
Katie, Glenn mentioned that he signed up before with 23andMe. I'm sure that there's others in the audience today who, like me, might have had some genetic testing with that original 23andMe cohort, 8 or 9 years ago, well before the launch of Fox Insight. Can we make our genetic data available to the Fox Insight study, and if so, how do we do that?
You can. So anyone that has Parkinson's that has done genetic testing through 23andMe previously is able to share their existing data with Fox Insight, which in turn is sharing that information with the research community to help advance our understanding of the lived experience and the biologic experience of Parkinson's. There are some tips and tricks and how you have to actually navigate the system, and so I would suggest in this moment saying anyone that has specific questions on the how to do that would be best served by emailing info@foxinsight.org, and there we'll have someone follow up with you to walk you through the process of either sharing existing data that already exists from previous 23andMe testing, or for anyone interested in participating that has not done the genetic study through 23andMe previously, how to do it now for the first time.
Great. Okay, let's move on here. Ultimately, each and every study has its own benefits and its own risks. Every person, whether they are a person with Parkinson's or a control considering enrollment, probably should have a thorough discussion of the risks and benefits with the trial team before starting. Marissa, do you feel that patients should disclose their study enrollments with their neurologist? Is that necessary that they get okay from their neurologist, or can they do that without that?
Oh, so it's not required to get the okay from your local neurologist if you want to participate in any research studies. But the most important things for any kind of research study that anyone wants to participate in is really looking at that consent form. Before you start the study, really understanding what it is that is going to be involved, what are the possible benefits, and also what are the possible risks. And going through the consent form, you should make sure to ask any questions that you may have regarding what the study is looking for, what has been done previously, just so that everyone, every patient or everyone who enrolls is well informed in what is entailed in that study. And I do think having your local physicians aware of what studies you're participating in can be very helpful as well. But again, that is a personal decision that each person can make.
And Glenn, so you were a person who jumped right in as a clinical trial participant. If you look back at this experience of clinical trial volunteerism from the very beginning, what do you think has been the greatest benefits to you and your family? And were there any studies that the risks outweighed the benefits for you personally?
Two-part question there. Well, the greatest benefit for me has really been the hope and knowing that I'm actively participating and trying to find a cure or find better treatments. because that's the only way we're going to get there, and I guess it's rewarding personally to feel like I was part of that. PPMI is a biggie and takes a lot of time. There's been a couple of trials. To answer your second question, there's been 2 trials that have come up that one was actually a trial I chose not to participate in, and it really was just a matter of time. The requirements were 2 or 3 visits for 2 or 3 weeks in a row to the Cleveland Clinic, which is about an hour from my home, followed by every other Thursday for an extended period of time, and it was a time issue more than anything else because I still have a full-time job. So I just couldn't give that much time to the process. I really wanted to participate in this particular drug trial, but I just couldn't because of the time requirements. And then the second trial wasn't really a trial. It was more of a questionnaire of should they even try this trial, and it was a DBS trial in which they were planning to have like half the people have DBS turned on and half of them not turned on, and it was like, boy, I sure don't want to go through brain surgery and not have it turned on. So that one I just said no, I really wouldn't be interested if that opportunity came up.
I think that there's Marissa, as somebody who sees patients in the office as well as does research, how do people feel about this possibility of getting a placebo? And when they are given the consent form, a placebo isn't really a risk, but it is a shortcoming of a study if that's what they end up with. Do most studies allow patients after the placebo, if they're a placebo person, to cross over into the non-placebo group?
Yes, and so that's a great question that I think everyone should ask in the beginning as well. Is there are many studies that will do that. That if you get assigned to the placebo group and you do not get the intervention, that they're looking for, whether that could still just be the exercise, it could be a medication, or it could be more of a procedure. If they will offer that for you at the end of the study, most of the medication or drug studies are around 6 to 8 weeks in length. And so if you're not getting that treatment option, they may offer it to you. There are other types of trial designs which may do a crossover where you may switch over. If you start with placebo, they may change you then over to the study drug, and vice versa. You may start with the study drug and then switch over to placebo. So understanding how the trial is going to be conducted is very important. But I will point out that having the placebo arm is a very important part of the study because there is what we call a placebo effect, where when you start, or if anyone starts a new treatment, there is the idea, I think it's more of like a hope that you're going to improve and going to get better. And so sometimes this placebo of this improving, when you don't really have a new medication, can be seen. And so we want to make sure when we're testing new therapies and new treatments that improvement that we're seeing is not, just from this placebo effect, and that there's actual improvement of the intervention in Parkinson's disease. And so that's the rationale for why the placebo group is very important in intervention studies.
Is the placebo effect higher in Parkinson's studies?
It can be. It can be very high in Parkinson's disease studies. Some of the medication trials that are from many years ago, the placebo effect can be as high as 20 to 30% of patients improved with the placebo drug.
We should all just take a placebo.
But usually, the placebo effect.
Go ahead. Karen, this is Glenn. I want to throw in that the potential DBS trial that I talked about, you did get turned on eventually, but just spending 2 years, I think it was, as it was proposed, not being turned on, just was what didn't appeal to me.
Yeah, I can understand that. Some of the most interesting and important work that's being done, really involves the testing of new drugs and therapies for symptom relief and disease progression. But oftentimes when I speak to Parkinson's patients in my own community about being a trial volunteer, I find that many are reluctant to consider such trials. Katie, while we can never remove all the risks, what kind of safeguards are in place in order to minimize the risk of these kind of interventional trials?
So there are a lot of administrative oversight, medical oversight processes that are put in place to ensure that the safety, health, and privacy of research volunteers are protected. So for different types of studies that can look quite different, you might imagine there may be more need for medical safety oversight in a study that is testing an experimental treatment than a study like Fox Insight that is collecting survey data, for example. So there are many rigorous processes that allow for research to advance while there's oversight to ensure the protection and privacy of volunteers. One of the most important players in this ecosystem of research participation are entities called institutional review boards. And those are groups that look at the study details, what's being asked of volunteers, the background research supporting this idea that this research should even move forward, and the risks and benefits. All of these things that are summarized in a more digestible format in the consent form, the details of that are reviewed by these institutional review boards, which include, I think importantly, not just medical experts and research experts, but people from the community that can really evaluate is this any risk that might be associated with a study participation. Is that the potential benefit really worth it? I'd like to say also this idea of risk-benefit that might be reviewed by administrative or medical groups is also something that people will do their own calculus, and the risk-benefit of a study participation is likely to change throughout someone's disease experience. And it's true when you look at different populations. I might be more willing to tolerate some higher risk in a study that I would participate in for a health condition than I would allow my daughter to participate in the study. And so as someone moves through their journey with Parkinson's, making sure that you have an opportunity to reflect with yourself, with your family, with your doctor about how your risk-benefit preferences might change. They may be relatively stringent and particular when you're early in your disease, and they may become more broad when you're later in your disease. And so making sure that you check in with yourself and know that the decision to participate in research is always available, and so where you are with your journey and your decision-making, your own care, your own family, that goes into that risk-benefit calculation to participate in research throughout your lifetime.
Okay. So we're gonna move over here so that we can start answering some of the questions. But before we do that, I'd be remiss, Katie. Somehow we got to the end here and we barely mentioned Fox Trial Finder. There's several questions in the queue about how a spouse or partner can find out about what trials they might be able to enter in as a control. They're asking about how they talk to trial teams, how they can participate if they live in a remote area. Let's talk about Fox Trial Finder in terms of a tool that can help us get people enrolled in the proper trials, how they can get information to get in a trial that works for them.
Thanks. It's exciting to hear that people want to get involved listening to this webinar. And Fox Trial Finder, Karen, as you explained, really helps break down some of those gaps between someone saying, hey, I'm interested, I don't know how to get involved. Fox Trial Finder is sort of a match.com for research volunteers and trials that need them. If you're interested in enrolling in Fox Trial Finder, you'll fill out registration information that shares a bit about not just your health, but also your geography and your own preferences in terms of what types of studies you want to participate in or how far you would be willing to travel to participate in research. And what happens automatically once you fill out your profile based on your health history and your preferences, you'll get automatic matches of studies that you are eligible for. So that's an easy way to fill out the information about yourself and then passively get notifications about studies that are happening that are looking for somebody with that looks like you. Another opportunity for Fox Trial Finder is also to browse studies that are active, and it's a good way to just stay up to date with current research, even if you're not eligible, or if you're a spouse that's looking for someone for your partner's studies that you might want to suggest to him and her. So there's a way to just stay abreast of what research is happening through Fox Trial Finder. And another feature that's included within Fox Trial Finder is an ability to securely and privately connect with research teams. So there's it looks like email, but your name and contact information aren't shared. That would allow you to reach out through the Fox Trial Finder platform to connect with research teams. Most studies, or many studies, will also have contact information for the clinical site listed. So if you would want to reach out to them outside of Fox Trial Finder, that's possible, or if you prefer just to use the phone versus an online tool, phone numbers are also listed there. So if you're interested in taking a step towards participating in research, no matter who you are, Fox Trial Finder is a great place to go. If you're already in Fox Trial Finder and you haven't updated your information in a while, it's a good reminder and opportunity to go back in, update your health information. You may have moved in the last since you've registered, and update your preferences as well.
This is Glenn. I want to kick in one quick comment if I can, Karen.
Sure.
Frequently, probably half the trials I've signed up for, the email isn't always the best. So you click on that and sometimes you get the answer, but a lot of times the study coordinator changes at the research institution or something like that. So I would say a good amount of the time, if you haven't heard back in a week, just give them a call, and they can. That really makes a big difference.
That's good advice. Marissa, somebody is asking us, Gail wants to know, how important is brain donation to the research?
So a lot of research is done based on donations. And so a lot of the clinical research that is done at universities is through grants. So it's through donations. Could be from, NIH, other centers. We even have ways to donate, privately through private groups. Just as much as, we need patients to participate, we also, definitely need donations and funding so that we can conduct all of this research as well. So funding is another, important, piece of the puzzle in addition to getting participants for our research.
That's interesting to know. I think you missed the one word. She wanted to know about brain donation.
Oh, like through the Brain Initiative?
Yeah. One of the
no.
That's important is that
how is it important that people?
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about brain, like actual brain donation.
Yeah, brain.
Like, okay. Yeah, so that, that's also important. There, through our specific institution, we do have a process in a way that if you would like to donate your brain or, your body to research, at which point after you're gone, we do have a process in a way to set that up. So that, can be very helpful as well. Because we do have, we have cell models and we have animal models for Parkinson's disease. As we all know, we're not animals, and there may be lots of, interventions or treatments that work well in animals, but then, we get to humans and people with Parkinson's disease and they don't work as well, or they may work better. And so it is very important that we have human subjects, and if that, it's a very personal decision, but if that is a decision and a donation that you would like to make, I would definitely speak with your physician to see if there is a process in place where you can make sure that does happen.
And I'll add, there are many research studies that are simply, going to see your doctor and allowing them to store the information that will be part of your medical record in a data set so that there's information about your health or your Parkinson's throughout your lifetime that can make a brain donation, the impact of that be even greater. So it's not just that we know that this person had Parkinson's, but we know how that Parkinson's evolved throughout the person's life. It's a wonderful gift and tribute, and I think it's important for a disease like Parkinson's, where it's not easy to ask somebody to do a biopsy of a brain while they're alive, that this is really the only way that we can study the organ that is affected by the disease, at least with the current imaging tests and blood tests that we have today.
One of our audience listeners is asking whether you have to stop your medication to go on a clinical trial.
It depends on the study, and so there are many types of studies that don't require any change in medication, and there are a fraction that do. And so if that is something that's important to you to stay on your current medication or current dosing schedule, it's important to have that in mind when you talk to your doctor or talk to a research center about the types of studies that are available. So if you list that as a preference that you have is to not change medication, that might help you get connected with a study you're excited about faster than listening through things that you're uninterested in, because there are many studies that don't require you to change your medication.
And this is Glenn. I've also participated in some trials where they may have you hold off a dose. You don't take your morning dose, and you show up at 9 o'clock, and they want to test you without having had your meds, and then they have you take your meds, and you're there for a couple more hours, and then they test you again to see the impact of your medications that first dose of the day. So it really depends on the trial.
Glenn, Stephen is asking whether you've had any study that's helped you.
Emotionally, yes. I think and also I think some of the exercise trials in particular have helped me. I feel better after I exercise, and so I think that's driven home the point for me that exercise is critical, and I try and exercise every day. So that's really the one that most directly has impacted me. I have not taken any drugs yet. There was the one I wanted to, and I qualified for, but it just took too much time to participate. But as was said earlier, as I progress in my disease, I can see that as my work-life balance has shifted, and I'm spending more time working on Parkinson's than working on work, I can see that time coming when I'll participate in trials that do take more of my time.
Okay. Katie, we have a question from Don. He wants to know, what are the protocols in place for securing the research data?
So there are many, it depends on the study. Many studies are not set up to share information outside of the study team. And so they're within whatever academic institution or research center that's conducting those studies. They have strict policies about how data are stored, archived, or even shared among the researchers that are analyzing them. If groups are making data widely available to help accelerate research at a larger scale, there are even more protections. And so I think the simplest place to start, and something that gives me confidence in participating in research, is a process of de-identification, meaning that your identifiable information, your name, your address, your birth date, your zip code, are almost always separate from the study data that you contribute. So there would not be a way for someone to identify that your data were associated with this particular study. It's a hard, I'm not being very articulate about the way it plays out in practice, but in a study like Fox Insight, for example, that's online, we do collect people's name and email address, and that information, that identifiable information, is stored in a different database separate from any of the health information or genetic information that's contributed. And so there's not even a connection between the two to help safeguard the data privacy. There's other studies that approach it with anonymizing, meaning that there's no way to recontact people, and so the link between someone's name or birth date are completely broken from the data that they've shared. And so there are, of course, we're living in a time where data privacy is a topic of conversation, and I think it's important to feel empowered when you start to join a study if you have questions and your questions are not answered through the consent, or even if they are, that you have the power to talk to the research team to make sure that you really understand what safeguards are in place.
Well, on the flip side of that, it would seem as a Parkinson's patient that many of us would hope that our data was shared in order to speed along some of the research that's being done. Is that something that's happening more often these days, that they're actually setting up the trials so that data can be shared?
That's one of the goals of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, is to promote data sharing. It's part of our research funding strategy that we could, let's say, fund one lab to do one study, and then only those investigators benefit from the knowledge of what is conducted in the context of that research. Or we could fund that one lab for the study and then ask them to share the information so that tens, hundreds, thousands of researchers are able to benefit from that knowledge. So from the Michael J. Fox Foundation's perspective, we do take data privacy and volunteers' privacy very, very seriously, and we set up the right infrastructure to allow for data sharing so that we help accelerate research, which can be quite slow. An example that we've seen within PPMI is data are available to the research community at large, and there have been over 1 million downloads of the data. So instead of just helping one lab conduct research, now we've helped 1 million labs do research. And I think there's the balance of privacy, but there are good processes in place to protect data while also responsibly sharing it.
Great. Marissa, we're going to take one last question from Frank. He asks, what cures offer most promise today?
Well, that is a great question. I think that we're, as researchers, we're all, I'm sorry?
Cures are in quotation.
In quotation. Okay. I think we're all looking for a cure. That's the ultimate, goal, that we're hoping to arrive at a cure through all of the different research modalities that we're using. I think that gene therapy, as we were talking about, how genetics may play a role in Parkinson's disease, as Katie had mentioned about GBA and LRRK2, some of these genetic mutations that we've identified. I think gene therapy and gene-targeted treatments are on the horizon, and for people that have these mutations, that may offer, improvement or slowing or progression of the disease, or even possibly a cure. Now, I know that's still on the horizon, but I'm optimistic that, we're headed in the right direction. And even just besides, some of, there's, Katie had mentioned 3 genes, there's a handful of genes that we've identified that really seem to cause Parkinson's disease if you have a certain change or mutation. But there are many other regions within the genome that we've identified that may put someone at risk of Parkinson's disease. And, what does that risk really mean? I think is a question that we're looking more and more into, whether there's an impact of, your genetic change that you may have and how that interferes with the environment. And so I think that, there's a lot of great promise on the horizon for Parkinson's disease.
Great. That's what we all want to hear. So our time is short, and so as we finish our conversation, Dr. Marissa Dean, as a clinician who treats Parkinson's patients and their families every day, what message do you have for our listeners today in regards to their participation in clinical trials?
The one thing I think that we hadn't talked much about, which I think is very important, is diversity. And when we're studying Parkinson's disease, we say when you see one person with Parkinson's disease, you've seen one person with Parkinson's disease. It looks very different in each individual. And, each individual, may present at a certain age. The disease may progress differently. So it's very important that we have research participants from all different backgrounds as well. This could be racial diversity, ethnic diversity, age diversity. It's very, important that we get a good representation of what Parkinson's disease looks like in each person. So I would just encourage everyone, to find what kind of, if you're interested in research and participating, find what works for you and what the best options for you are and get involved.
That's a great call to action. And Katie Copel, your final thoughts.
I think it's easy to say there's lots of research out there and there's lots of volunteers who are willing to do it. So I'd encourage people to register for Fox Trial Finder and think about in the upcoming year committing to one study that you're interested in participating in and taking action. It's easy to say, Glenn is participating in all these studies, I'm not needed, or Karen, you or your husband are participating in these studies, I'm not needed, and that's not true. So I want people to walk away knowing that they are needed desperately by researchers and that researchers are incredibly grateful for the contribution of volunteers because it's a partnership to get us to new treatments and a cure.
Great. And Glenn, the final thought. What advice do you have, maybe a first step for those who are still sitting on the sidelines wondering how to get involved?
Well, from a big picture standpoint, the only way we're going to find a cure or a better treatment is for everybody to participate. And the more people who participate, the faster that's going to happen so that the trials aren't delayed and ultimately do happen. So I'm doing it, you can do it, everybody can participate in some level. So if somebody's just looking to dip their toe in the water, Fox Insight or signing up for Fox Trial Finder, those two easy steps, get on the computer, sign up for both of those, and that's a great place to start. And then just look at the trials that come your way and say, okay, yeah, I'm willing to do that, I'm willing to do some other things, and that's the only way we're going to get across the finish line if we all participate, or at least more of us participate. So
that's a great last
thank you
thought.
All for,
and we all have a responsibility to participate. And as Michael J. Fox says, no amount of money replaces research volunteers in speeding a cure for Parkinson's. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Glenn Leppo, Dr. Marissa Dean, Dr. Katie Copel, for sharing their expertise. Slide you see up on the screen tells you how you can watch previous webinars. We will also be sending a link to this webinar if you want to listen to it again, or if you want to share it with others, you'll be able to do so. This wraps up the latest Third Thursday webinar. Don't forget to join us for the next webinar on May 17th when we will play a webinar on Parkinson's pain and fatigue. Thanks for joining us. I'm Karen Jaffe. So long.
Thank you.